Dear church, let's talk about the Christian and politics. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. I'm excited about my guest today, the mayor of Abilene, Texas, Anthony Williams. Thank you, my friend, for being here.
Thanks for the invite. I'm excited about being here today.
I appreciate it so much. We are uptown now. We've got the mayor. No, I appreciate you so much. And I want to talk a little bit today about a lot of different things. But one of the things that I appreciate so much about you is that you have always been so transparent. You know, ask me anything, I'll tell you anything. And I think that that is going to bode well for this conversation. And so I appreciate that about you. Tell us a little bit before we get started, kind of about yourself. I know you were on the city council many years before you became mayor. And you might in that also talk about our system of local government here, because you make a whopping $1 a year as the mayor of Abilene, Texas. So talk a little bit about all those things, if you don't mind.
Well, Abilene has been so good to me. My father was murdered when I was 4 years old. And it was really the Highland Church who reached out to my mother and to my family, mentored me, helped us spiritually, of course, but also emotionally and even financially. And I couldn't articulate it, then, but I always wanted to give back and repay the love and kindness that was displayed to me. And so for me, I've been volunteering for 30 years in this community, first with at-risk youth and then on boards and committees, and didn't know at the time, but I just wanted to give back since I've been so blessed.
Yeah. So happily married, how many kids?
So we married, 31 years
Really?
This year.
Okay.
We have 3 children. Anthony Jr., he's in the Metroplex. He does compliance work for the healthcare industry. My daughter, Alyssa, is in Florida. In fact, I'll have my first grandchild.
That's exciting.
Sometime in early January, late December. And our youngest, John, is a 19-year-old who lives here. Spent a year at ACU, but wants to be a fireman now.
Yes,
so,
I've met John. Great young man.
He is. And so, so that's my family.
Okay. And so how long on the city council again?
So this fall will begin my 20th year on the Abilene City Council. So
Wow.
The last 3 years, of course, I've been mayor.
Right.
But, those council for a very long time.
That's right. And the way our council is set up, talk a little bit about that. The mayor is kind of the...
So the mayor and the council set the vision. So we're the policymakers.
Okay.
Then the professional staff, led by the city manager, are the administrators. So the council has 2 workshops once a year. The first and most important, I think, is in January. We talk about what things we want to see come to be. And those are input we've gathered throughout the year from citizens, things we've thought about. And so we give kind of a wish list. Then the city manager takes those things and assigns dollars and cents to them, that being our budget, which brings to the second workshop of the year, which is the budget workshop. We talk about the things we talked about incorporating to the budget, and then we approve or modify, change that, and then it transitions from being the city manager's budget to our budget.
Gotcha. So you have a vision workshop, so to speak, and then
Correct.
you have the budget workshop.
That's correct.
So making $1 a year, it's hard to live on. So tell us a little bit about your secular job.
So I work for Abilene Christian University, my 24th year
Wow.
at ACU.
I didn't realize that.
The first 20 years, we love titles at institutions.
Right.
So I was the Chief Business Services Officer for ACU. So the bookstore, the world famous Bean, purchasing, the post office, off-campus properties that made money at the time. So we had... a $15 million revenue portfolio. And then depending if we're building, procurement could be easily $50 million. So I did that for 20 years. I knew that I wanted to run for mayor, and I thought I could win.
Yep.
But, in that role, that role demands someone to be there on campus.
Sure.
So 3.5 years ago, I asked to have opportunity to work in advancement. And so I'm a gift officer for university, so I cover all of West Texas.
Wow.
And the state of New Mexico. And so I raise money for the kingdom via ACU.
Lots of travel?
A little travel.
Yeah.
A lot of windshield time.
I bet there is. No, we are so thankful for you being here. And
I
I really
appreciate that.
wanted our discussion to kind of focus on what it means to be a Christian in politics. How hard is that? Is it difficult? I mean, to strike that balance? I mean, I guess there's not a balance, but I would assume it's pretty easy to get caught up in, because politics can be messy, can it? Even at the local level?
Well, I told Chris, I'm not sure what you do. It's always a challenge to maintain your faith. Yeah. We are bombarded with the false values of this world. And it takes a lot of discipline and commitment to the way to be able to maintain that. And politics are no different at all. In fact, I had an older mentor, a Christian mentor of mine, that early on talked to me about not being a politician, but being a statesman. And there's a difference. Yeah. Okay. And so in Abilene, I volunteer. I've never articulated ambitions to be a congressman or a senator, but really want to make Abilene better. Because again, Abilene has been very, very good to me. But whenever you involve politics and money and those other challenging attributes, there's a challenge. But I hope that I've served well in my role as mayor, and before that as a council person, and exhibited the values that I believe that we all should, and that is of our Lord and Savior.
I agree. I think, and by the way, for what it's worth, I think you have. Talk a little bit about, because, you're representing your faith, you're representing Christ, you're representing your local church. You attend Mendel Street Church of Christ here in Abilene. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, do you ever find yourself I'm sure you do, between a rock and a hard place, and it's kind of like you can't please anybody sometimes?
So, I'm an elder at Mendel Street, and so, one of the men who oversee the flock there. It's a very sober and responsible when you think about it. Yeah. And so not only to those parishioners that are counting on me to lead in the way, but my own family. Yeah. And so in city government, you're faced with things that challenge that sometimes. And so, I try to be expedient in what I do, but I try to make sure I don't depart away from the faith.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you, what has been your biggest challenge?
Well, I think, we live in a current climate that is emotionally charged. You have polarizing segments. And you don't want to ignore those things, but you also don't want to give into concepts that the world promotes. That is schism and division. Okay. You and I don't share the same gene pool. Our DNA is different, but the blood of Christ binds us together. Amen. Like you and others, I'm bothered by the most recent events in our country. Those things that divide us, that are hurtful, and that when I look at a man being lynched in 2020, and it brings back the stories I heard as a youth, and those feelings of anger and even rage, and then I think about, what does Christ call us not just to do, but to be? We must be an example. And if there's any solution for the current climate that we live in, is that Chris and Anthony and others have to love each other, not because necessarily our love for each other, but our love for Christ and what that really means. Yeah. And so I'm not sure in my lifetime or your lifetime that some aspirations that are articulated by some civil rights leaders ever come to be. I think we should strive towards that, but really our strive should not be of this world.
Right.
It should be of the one to come.
You said it recently that Abilene is different. Not that it's perfect or that it's without its problems, but you said it was different. Rather than me saying what you said, I love the way you put it. Why don't you kind of elaborate on that for just a few minutes? Because I thought that was very well put.
Well, I'll give you an example. I was with a minister on Thursday. We had just both of us been part of a rally. His daughter was there, where you had some who were saying and doing very inappropriate things. Just a few. Abilene's had very peaceful protests, and I admire those who have led. But she asked one of the young men there why he came to Abilene, or asked him why he was here. And he said he wasn't even from Abilene. He's from San Antonio. I mean, a group drove down from San Antonio.
Yeah.
And I said, why'd you come here? Was her question. So we want to raise havoc.
Huh.
But Abilene is different. And you know, Chris, Abilene is different. Not perfect. Abilene is not insulated from issues that face our country. Discrimination, unfair treatment happen here in our community. No doubt about that. But I think most of the time when we have challenged that, we responded well. I mean, we've had 3 protests in the last week and a half. There were no bricks thrown. There was no violence, but you had the articulation of frustration. And that's something that we should embrace. And I think that's part of our DNA as Abilenians, that we work together for the common good. And in these protests, you had all sorts of different people represented, the old, the young, the rich, the poor, the black, white, and polka dot, which that's a great compliment to Abilene, Texas.
I think so. Have you found that it's been difficult during this to meld mayor, elder, Christian? I mean, you don't look at those separately. I know you well enough to know that, but have you found that maybe people trying to divide those things out, or how do you fight that?
You know, there's constantly people who want us to be divided.
Yeah.
And there's some people on opposite sides that would have an issue with you and I loving each other.
Yeah, I agree.
And equally distributed on both sides.
Yes.
And so the challenge is to always remain true to who you are, and more importantly, what Christ demands us to be. And when you do that, if that is front and center, our ambition is behind us, it allows us to be different. People ought to look at Chris and look at Anthony and know we're Christians without us saying we're Christians.
Yes.
You know, I think you're a minister, but I think the most powerful sermons that are preached are the ones that are displayed and not spoken.
I agree. Yeah, because, I tell our church members, you're reaching more people than I could ever reach by the way that you live. You may be the only Bible they read, their only book that they open, You said something to me before we came in here, and I really appreciated it, and I'd like you to elaborate just a little bit. You said, I want you to see me as a black man, but not just a black man.
Yeah. Now, I could be wrong, but I think I'm a good-looking black guy. And so
we'll have a poll up soon, that they can.
And so look, I'm proud of my culture and my ethnicity, and I embrace that. I love the African American culture. However, I hope that in history, I'm not notated as the black mayor of Abilene, but a successful mayor of Abilene who happened to be black. I think in our relationship that you recognize the beauty of my brown skin, but you get to know my spirit and know me for the spirit that I truly am.
Absolutely.
And I think if everybody had the ability to do that, the problems that we face would be problems no more.
Yeah. And, the role that you fill as an elder in the church, I mean, my goodness, what's greater than that, And so let me ask you this. I asked you what your biggest challenge was, and that's probably a little unfair because right now, I mean, there's a lot of them. But what's been your biggest reward in being mayor of the city of Abilene? What have you found to be so rewarding about this? Because I know you well enough that you treat your role as mayor as a ministry. Yeah. So what has been the biggest reward?
I guess the single biggest reward is knowing that we're making a difference.
Yeah.
That the time and the effort that you put in, it has a reward. When people appreciate what you've done and you have an opportunity to see very tangible results. We had 5 very problematic neighborhoods in our community, and this was in 2008. We just talked about it. It's known as ANI, A-E-N-I, the Abilene Neighborhood Initiative. And in one of those neighborhoods in 2013, crime dropped 50%. And there were many nonprofits, the police department, and a number that were involved and made that happen. And I was visiting that neighborhood, and I had an older woman come up to me in tears, a woman who, after 5 or 6 o'clock, would lock herself in her home until the next morning and was thankful for what was occurring. Now, that was never reported on the news. She's now a significant citizen in the eyes of most, but that time she took to say that, I mean, it was like saying sick him to a dog.
Yeah, I bet.
You know, I got very, very motivated, and there's a lot of hard work that has transpired from a lot of different stakeholders that has made a difference in our community, and that makes it all worth it.
Yeah, and you know, I've watched recently. You know, we've been following your Facebook updates. You know, obviously what the city council is doing. As we've moved ahead, we just reopened yesterday at Oldham Lane, and we're filming on Monday. This will air on Thursday, but we reopened June the 7th, and we followed the guidelines of Mayor Williams and our governor, our president, and all that. You know, we've talked about race a little bit, and I'd like to get back to that in just a minute, but talk about the pandemic. I mean, how difficult was that? Because it seemed like information changed daily. I mean,
yeah, you know, I mean, hourly sometimes.
Yeah.
In fact, Dr. Young, our superintendent,
Yes.
made a comment using a metaphor. He talked about like this pandemic or administration during this pandemic
Yeah.
is like building an airplane in flight. And that's really what it felt like.
Sure.
I mean, we had weekly CDC meetings. I'm sorry, daily CDC meetings,
Yeah.
weekly HHS meetings, meetings with the governor's office, meeting with, you know, Stan Lambert, our state representative, Jody Arrington, our congressman, daily meetings with Johnny Bull, our judge. And we're trying to make decisions. And the data was so fluid. You can make one decision based on a set of data matrix, and the next day it all is different. And so people were saying, I remember I heard a comment one time, and I think I gave a report maybe on Facebook, and a lady, a citizen, sent me a message, says, you know what, I feel like we know more than y'all do. And I replied back, you probably do.
You probably do, yes.
You know, but I'm telling you, you know, Memorial Day was the first off days, that weekend, that I had off in 9 weeks.
Is that right?
I mean, because I have a day job.
Yes.
And so, I mean, just constant pressure and trying to understand. And the very most intelligent people I know, I call them the white coat committee. You know, we're doing the very best they could, but this is a novel disease, and people just don't know. Everything is still based on theory. Yeah. It's better theory. It's better than it was 6 months ago. Sure. But another 6 months, we'll know more.
Yeah. And, you know, I serve local politics on the Wiley School Board, and, you know, one of those on the White Coat Committee, Stephen Lowry, serves with me. And
Chief of Staff for the hospital.
And that's one of the things that we talked about is, you know, our superintendent, Joey Light, is saying, you know, hearing on Friday, hey, from spring break, Friday, get ready to start school Monday. And then by Sunday, you may not be going back to school. You know, it's just, it changed all the time. And I can't imagine the difficulty, because Dr. Longley was on this podcast, and one thing he said about the pandemic was that a lot of times science, the study of diseases and things, it happens in a lab, and then we come back and give you the findings. Well, we're the lab. We're seeing it as it happens, and that's got to be difficult.
Yes.
Gotta be difficult.
You know, in the pandemic, you had two different strains. A strain that affected the Northwest was from China, and in New York, it was from Italy, and they acted differently.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, so you had these very intelligent white coat community folk coming up projections based on different data sets.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just very, very challenging.
I bet it was. It seems like we're in a good place now. I know.
We are. You know, as of today, we have 13 active cases. We have none that are hospitalized.
Good.
Abilene has fared well, and West Texas has fared well. Texas has fared well.
Yes.
You know, and so, but we're bracing ourselves for the fall. Again, more hypotheticals.
Right.
You know, but we're going to try to do the very best we can to be sure that the safety of this community is at the forefront.
I know you will. And, you know, if it's true that heat kills it, we're in good shape. 100 degrees every day. My dad calls me on the phone. He says, what's the weather like out there? Dad, it's the same every day. From June on, it's, you know, 103 every day. And, you know, it's hot. Talk a little bit about because as Christians, there's a lot of differences in in politics and our views on politics. You have some from, I say the David Lipscomb camp. He was one that said Christians shouldn't be involved in politics at all, no way, shape, or form. They have no business being involved in it. You have some that, in my opinion, right now are getting to where they idolize politics. I mean, it's become an idol for them, and unfortunately, it controls their faith rather than their faith controlling their politics. But then there's me that I think falls in the middle. If we know this is the system that we have, why not promote solid Christian people to be in those positions, if that's even possible at the federal level? But, why not promote that? And so, I'm one that, believes in that. I don't certainly scold anyone for having a different opinion than me. So talk a little bit about, how you view that as far as, the Christian and politics and what you see as the approach, your view, and how we need to look at that from an elder perspective and leading the church and all those kind of things.
From federal government to state government, local government, the elected officials are the policymakers. Yes. They set policy. They set the vision. I want to elect individuals that share my core values. Yes. I think it's very, very important and should not be underestimated on the power of setting policy. I'm not loyal, and I'm a conservative, but I'm loyal to Christ and not the color red. And so I think there is a balance there, and there are some that put a higher value to a political association than they do worshiping the Lord. I mean, that is true, and so I don't think that one side is more heavily than the other side is. I think that there are good Christian folk on both sides. I personally have a viewpoint that when I cast a vote, I cast it based on a couple of set principles. Mm-hmm. But however, I try not to be offensive and disrespectful to someone that thinks differently. I heard this metaphor once in regards to politics. Mm-hmm. My grandfather never wore a wristwatch. He always had a pocket watch.
Yes.
And he never took the watch out unless someone asked what time it was. So if you ask me, I'll give you my opinion. Yeah. I don't lead with that politically.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think that one of the things, I got asked this question the other day, what is one of the biggest things you're seeing as a minister now, one of the biggest hurdles? And I said, I don't know if it's the biggest hurdle, but one of the big hurdles is that, so many are idolizing politics today, and so many of them are placing, it's like my politics forms my faith rather than my faith affects my politics. And I think what you have said over and over here, and I've heard you say it before, is you start with Jesus.
Yes.
You start with Jesus, you start with the gospel, and let that shape everything else.
Yes.
And I said this in the sermon yesterday morning, our first day back, and of course it was difficult because that first Sunday morning back, you don't want it to be a doom and gloom occasion, but you feel like you need to kind of approach what's going on in the culture, being in the position you're in.
Yes.
And so I tried to kind of, we looked at the author and perfecter of our faith, how it all starts with Jesus. And one of the things that I said was, don't start with your circumstances. Don't start with what's going on around you. Start with Jesus. And if you start with Jesus, that affects the way you approach your circumstances. Would you agree with that? I mean,
yes.
So start there and then work your way backwards. And how much different would a lot of this be if we started with Jesus and then allowed that to affect our circumstances? I think that you have a right to be angry. I mean, even Paul said, be angry, yet do not sin.
Correct.
And I think that's the key is, what are you going to do with your anger? How are you going to channel it? And so kind of working our way back around to, what's going on in our culture. Like you said, our city is different, not that it doesn't have problems, but even in the church, I mean, how do we deal with the issue of racism? And
I'm glad I had I'm an elder, and so I had a question that was proposed to me. And our church is a diverse church. Mm-hmm. And the question was, do you support Black Lives Matter? And so, I think Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. I think all lives matter. And so, and my response to my good friend, to my brother, I assess value from conception all the way to natural death. That's important to me. Sure. Any interruption from conception to natural death bothers me personally. From that vantage point, we can have a conversation. And so if life is interrupted prematurely, then I think we should take a stance. That's my opinion. I think that's biblical.
Yeah.
And I think as Christian folk, we can land there. And we should stand up. I mean, what occurred in our country with in Minnesota, that was a lynching.
Yes.
There's no way around that's a lynching. And Christian folk are leading us, that's wrong. Mm-hmm. If not, we lose credibility.
Sure.
Sure. And so that life should have never, ever, ever been lost.
And can't it be true that was a heinous crime? Can it be true that we stand against that injustice, and that we also stand against burning down someone's business and taking their livelihood from them? That both of those things can be true at the same time.
And I think the rioting and looting that occurred, I understand at the beginning why that occurred, but it turned into something more than that. And what it really did, it diminished the potency that the moment could have had. Right. We should have, as a country and as a Christian fellowship, had an opportunity to focus on the travesty and have conversation. What can we do? But what happened, we became distracted. And I would make an argument, that's how the devil works. Yeah. Of putting obstacles and circumstances that get us distracted. Yes. And I think, we always be very, very mindful and conscious of that and try to lead in a way. And so I am disturbed, I'm angry, it shouldn't have happened. Okay, but what's next? Yes. What are we going to do? Right. And that should be the narrative that should be leading the conversations.
Yeah, and I think all too often we paint with a broad brush. And this is going to be the subject of my sermon next Sunday night, is we paint with a broad brush, and we do it in minor ways. We do it in things, in ways that are probably, there's not many consequences. White people can't dance. All black people can play basketball or, football. They're good athletes. There's all these stereotypes, and you could know one person from the church that was a hypocrite, and all Christians are hypocrites. We just paint with this broad brush. We assume all poor people are lazy. We have this broad brush approach, and that's really what you see the narrative being in our culture. And that's what, my kids and I were talking about at the dinner table the other day, is that, there is a sense in which, we paint with a broad brush and we don't pinpoint exactly what the problem is and how do we get to the solution. But instead, we want to stay out here and we want to be broad and general. But there's something more specific here, isn't there? And like you said, what's the next step? How do we keep this from continuing to happen? But what happens is we paint with this broad brush. Okay, so all agree. Policemen are out and hunting down black people, or all
I think something powerful, Chris, about you, a white man saying that George Floyd was murdered, that Breonna Taylor was murdered, that Ahmaud Arbery was murdered, and at the same, and acknowledging that, and then answer a question. So what do we do about that as Christians? Yeah. What can we do? And my argument has always been that if the focal point is about coming up with a solution, and we focus on the solution and not just the problem, then we have an opportunity to move forward. Yeah. I've I served a long time, and I've been in meetings and been part of efforts where we have meetings and workshops and seminars, and all we do is focus on what the problem is and never provide a solution for it. And we leave that sometimes feeling good, like going out of a pep rally, and we're emotional, but we've not accomplished anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's all disturbing, but where it really does disturb me as well, I shouldn't say more, but it disturbs me just as much as, it exists in the church. It's still there. I think we'd like to think, and maybe in some places they've moved on, and maybe it's not as big of an issue. But I've seen it personally. I know that race is still an issue even among Christians. I know that because I've witnessed it personally as an elder, not mayor now, as an elder. How do you address that?
Yeah. And to be just balanced, I believe that the vast majority of Black, white, brown, and other are not racist.
Yeah,
I agree. You have these extremes, and they're loud and they garner the attention. Most of us are right here.
Yes.
And I think sometimes we pay too much attention to the extremists on both sides.
I agree.
Instead of the majority who are right here.
Yes. Oh, we've got some phenomenal public servants in our congregation. I know you do as well. Police officers, firemen, wonderful public servants. We've got, it's just, again, painting with that broad brush.
Yes.
And we've got to get specific. We've got to narrow down, and we've got to look at the problem and see what we can do with it. And you're not going to get there by living on those edges and those extremes. Yes. And it's bothersome to me when we act like the only action really to take is posting something on Facebook or so. Yes. I mean, I'm one that believes social media may be running us. I'm certainly not necessarily helping us, but there's more to it than that. And I think having these conversations, these dialogues, we've got a good friend of mine that's going to be on next week and talk about this. And we were discussing this yesterday, and he said, just sitting here talking about this is something, I mean, taking the time out just to talk about it is something. So as we kind of wrap up, talk a little bit more about, I touched on this in the beginning, talk a little bit more about, so Christian and politics, your faith. I know as a former coach, sometimes it was hard to keep my faith. I'm sitting there feeling like I've got a bad hand dealt to me in a basketball game, and I'm yelling at the ref, and I'm thinking, I'm losing my faith real quick. What's the biggest tug? What's the biggest push pull that you face when it comes to that? Because I know you've had some challenges. I know there's been some things that really kind of put you to the test, and you think, how do I win here? Right?
And sometimes, I guess, how do you find a victory? What does that really look like? And so, again, I think the most challenging thing to me is when those raw feelings conjure up experiences, sometimes painful from the past, and I'm driven to address those pains and those hurts and those frustrations. And that's what I want to do. I had a recent incident that happened to me, and some things were said that offended me. And I was upset, and I wanted to respond a certain way. And I thought about my example. I thought about how I'm an elder in the Lord's church. I am the husband to Lynette. I'm the father to John, Alyssa, and Anthony. I'm the son of Jackie Williams. And I am not going to allow a situation to create in me an example that is not consistent with my commitment to Christ. And those have come up, and they will continue to come up, not just for me, but for you and all those who believe in the way. And the challenge is to always commit to putting Him first.
Yeah, and what I've noticed is one of the bigger challenges right now, and I know you've seen it as well, is there's one narrative. And if you don't go along with that narrative, but so often the narrative is flawed, like we've talked about before. So often it's flawed. And how much would we benefit as a culture if we extended some grace and if we, of course, I've always said this to the folks at Oldham Lane too, from the pulpit, is that the world's always going to be the world. We say we live in uncertain times and all that. Well, we always have. We're all day to day, so to speak, so it's always been the world being the world. What bothers me is when it seeps into the church, and we should be better than that. We should be better, and we should be able to see our distinction and our uniqueness. Like you said before, the whole idea, well, I'm just colorblind. Well, we don't expect you to be colorblind. You expect me to see your uniqueness and your distinction. But at the same time, we all share the same spiritual DNA. We're all washed in the blood of Christ, and that's what joins us. And man, how much different this would be if we could all get to that point. Man, thank you so much.
Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. We could talk for a long time, but I know you're a busy man, and I just thank you so much and I want our viewers and listeners to know that I texted Anthony and I thought, well, I mean, he's a busy man. He's not going to be able to come on. He immediately texted back and said, I'd love to. So I appreciate that too. You're always available, always transparent.
I appreciate you.
And I'm just so thankful for this discussion. Again, I know we didn't cover everything, but if you have questions, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. If you have a specific question for Mayor Williams, I'll make sure that he gets it. And if it's a real difficult question, I'll make sure you get it. And we can get him in on the conversation. Remember to share about the podcast. You can find us on Spotify and iTunes and right here on Facebook, YouTube. And just thank you for watching or listening. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.